Good afternoon and welcome to ABBA, Abigail Bible Believing Answers, and I am your host, Dr. Ruby Abigail. We're celebrating Black History this month, the month of February, and we just want to give you some backdrop stories of the Black History Month, how it got started, who founded it, and what it is to represent as we celebrate Black Americans with honor and dignity. Black history was usually celebrated the second week in the month of February, and the founder is Carter G. Woodson. He was born in 1875 and he lived to 1950. He was an American historian, a scholar, and the founder of the Association for Study of Negro Life and History, or the ASNLH. He was instrumental in launching the Negro History Week as it started off in 1926. And the reason why he chose the second week of the month of February, not because it was the shortest month or anything like that, it was because it was the birth month of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, which was influential both in Frederick Douglass, an abolitionist in the movement to eradicate slavery, and of course Abraham Lincoln in the influential in the emancipation of slaves. So both of them were born in the month of February. It is said that Frederick Douglass was born, is not documented, but they're estimating that he may have been born on February the 14th. And then, of course, Abraham Lincoln was born in the month of February as well. So, first, as I said, there was the Black History Week, and critics long argued that Black history should be taught and celebrated year round, not just during 1 month of each year. And it was Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history, who first set out in 1926 to designate a time to promote and educate people about Black history and the culture. Him being a historian and the president of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, or either better known as the ASALH, Woodson envisioned a week-long celebration to encourage coordinated teaching of Black history in public schools. He designated the second week, as I said, of February for that reason. And the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, which he founded in 1915, the idea wasn't to place limitations, but really to focus and broaden the nation's consciousness. It is believed that Woodson's goal from the very beginning was to make the celebration of Black history in the field of history a serious area of study. So that's the initiation of the celebration. It started off with a week, and then the idea eventually grew and acceptance. And by the 1960s, Negro History Week had evolved into what it is now known as Black History Month. Protests around racial injustice, inequality, and anti-imperialism that were occurring in many parts of the United States were pivotal to this change. Colleges and universities also began to hold commemorations, such as Kent State University being one of the first. And then 50 years after the first celebration, President Gerald R. Ford officially recognized Black History Month during the country's 1976 bicentennial. Ford called upon Americans to seize the opportunity to honor too often neglected accomplishments of Black Americans in every area and endeavor throughout our history. So 40 years after the Ford formally recognized Black History Month, it was Barack Obama, the nation's first Black president, who delivered a message of his own from the White House, a place which was built by slaves. Black History Month shouldn't be treated as though it's is somehow separated from our collective American history, or somehow just boiled down to a compilation of greatest hits from the March on Washington or from some of our sports heroes, Obama said. It is about lived, shared experiences of all African Americans, high and low, famous and obscure, and how those experiences have shaped and challenged and ultimately strengthened America, he added. And not only do the United States celebrate Black History, but Canada commemorates Black History Month in February as well. And then we have the UK and Ireland that celebrates Black History in October. So the Black pioneers that built America that we're honoring with dignity and want to shed a light on them. A lot of them have commemorations through stamps, and the spotlights are put on them through calendars and speeches, such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Muhammad Ali, Harriet Truman, and several others. But there are some that I would like to shed light on that kind of fell up under the radar, and not so much all the pioneers that should be celebrated and mentioned. Just want to shine a light on them and their accomplishments and contributions to civil rights movement and the arts and politics and technology and much more. And we're going to start off with Claudette Colvin. 9 months before Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, a 15-year-old Claudette Colvin refused to move to the back of the bus to give up her seat to a white person. When the bus driver ordered her to get up, she refused and said she had paid her fare and it was her constitutional right. And after that, she was arrested. And Miss Colvin said to the NPR, "All I remember is that I was going to walk off the bus voluntarily. I'm sorry, all I remember is that I was not going to walk off the bus voluntarily," Colvin said. And later, Colvin became the main witness in a federal lawsuit, which is tagged as Broader versus Gale, which ended segregation on public transportation in Alabama. So we celebrate her for helping with that movement. And then there's Robert S. Abbott. He laid the foundation, which would eventually birth many Black publications such as Ebony, Jet, Essence magazines, Black Enterprise, Right On, Sheen, and also founded the Chicago Defender weekly newspaper, and came out as first a 4-page pamphlet, and then it increased its circulation in every edition. And the Defender played an important role in the encouragement of African Americans to migrate from the South for better economic opportunities. And the success of the paper made Mr. Abbott one of the first African American self-made millionaires. And then we have Shirley Chisholm, which of course was one of the great politicians. She kicked the door in for African American women holding major roles in government. She first served as an educational consultant for New York City's Bureau of Child Welfare and ran for the New York State Assembly in 1964. Ms. Chisholm was elected in 1968 as the first African American Congresswoman. She served from 1969 to 1983, representing New York's 12th district. She later became one of the founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And Ms. Chisholm made more history in 1972 by becoming the first African American woman of a major political party to run for the Democrat Party's presidential nomination. Her campaign slogan was "Unbought and Unbossed." And as a result of that, our current Vice President, Ms. Kamala Harris, even made tribute to Ms. Shirley Chisholm in her presidential campaign announcement by using that same slogan that Ms. Chisholm founded. So we move on to Johnson H. Johnson, hailed as one of the most influential Black media publishers. Johnson got his start working for the Supreme Life Insurance Company, collecting weekly news clippings for his manager, which sparked the idea for his first publication, which was the Negro Digest. In 1942, with a $500 loan and $6,000 raised through subscriptions, Johnson launched his first dream project, which later became Black World. 3 years later, he launched Ebony in 1951. He created Jet, a weekly news magazine featuring Jet Beauty of the Week. And Johnson also expanded the magazine into a book publishing and owned Fashion Fair Cosmetics, the premier cosmetic company that catered to darker skin tones before there was Finney. Dorothy Height. Miss Height has been called the matriarch of the civil rights movement and often worked behind the scenes, excuse me, after receiving 2 degrees from New York University in the 1930s. Miss Height worked for the New York City Welfare Department and then became the assistant executive director of the Harlem YMCA. She was involved in anti-lynching protests, brought public attention to the exploitation of African American women working in slave markets, and escorted First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt to the National Council of Negro Women. As counselor, she served on more than 40 years. In the 1950s, she lobbied President Dwight D. Eisenhower to take an aggressive stance on school desegregation issues. And Ms. Height also worked with Martin Luther King Jr., and she stood on the platform with him when he delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech in August of 1963. Don Cornelius, with a distinctive baritone and demanding stature, Don Cornelius helped to shift Black culture into the spotlight with the creation of the show Soul Train. The hippest trip in America was picked up for national syndication in 1971 with its first episode featuring performers such as Gladys Knight, the Pips, Eddie Kendricks, Bobby Houghton, Honey Cone. The dance show exposed Black acts to larger national audience featuring Soul Train dancers, the Scramble Board, the Soul Train line, and Mr. Cornelius' famous catchphrase, love, peace, and soul. The combination of the performances and interviews proved to be a formula that worked, and the show is one of the longest running syndicated shows that ran until 2006. Alice Coachman. Miss Coachman became the first African American woman from any country to win an Olympic gold medal at the 1948 Summer Olympics in London. She set the record for the high jump at the Olympics, leaping 5 feet 6 and 1/8 inches. 4 years later, she became the first Black female athlete to endorse an international consumer product, which she signed on as Coca-Cola spokesperson. Over the course of her career, she won 34 national titles. She was officially inducted into the National Track and Field Hall of Fame in 1975 and the U.S. Olympic Hall of Fame in 2004. Maria P. Williams. The landscape of Hollywood has the work of many Black women, from Ava DuVernay to Issa Rae and Shonda Rhimes, to name a few. Miss Williams paved the way as the first Black woman to produce, write, and act in her own silent crime movie in 1923, The Flames of Wrath. To distribute the film, she formed the Western Film Producing Company and Booking Exchange with her husband. The former Kansas City teacher was also an activist and detailed her leadership skills in her 1916 book, My Work and public sentiment. Ethel Waters. Miss Waters first entered the entertainment business in 1920 as a blues singer. Before making history, Miss Waters was the first to integrate Broadway, appearing in Irving Berlin's As Thousands Cheer, and eventually became the highest paid performer on Broadway. In addition to becoming the first African American to star in her own television variety show in 1939, Miss Ethel Waters Show. She was nominated for an Academy Award for the Best Supporting Actress for the film Pinky in 1950. Also in 1950, Miss Waters was the first Black actress to star in a television series, Beulah, which aired on ABC in 1962. She became the first African American woman to be nominated for the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Single Performance by a Leading Lady for the show Route 66. Bayard Rustin. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is usually credited for the iconic March on Washington in August 1963, but it was actually Mr. Rustin who organized the historical event. The march brought more than 200,000 peaceful protesters of varying races and religions together to hear Dr. Martin Luther King "I Have a Dream" speech. As a gay man who had controversial ties to communism, he was considered too much of a liability to be on the front lines of the movement, so he worked in the background. Mr. Rustin also helped Dr. King found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Ruby Bridges. Miss Bridges was the first African American child to desegregate the all-white William Frantz Elementary School in Louisiana during the New Orleans school desegregation crisis on November 14, 1960. She was 6 years old at the time. Despite intimidation and discrimination, Miss Bridges never missed a day of school. Miss Bridges has written 2 books on her experience and has been honored with the Carter G. Woodson Book Award. And in 1999, she also set up the Ruby Bridges Foundation to promote equality in education. Miss Bridges is also lifetime activist of racial equality. In 1999, Miss Ruby Bridges established the Ruby Bridges Foundation to promote tolerance and create change through education. And in 2000, she was made an honorary deputy marshal in a ceremony in Washington, D.C. Gordon Parks. Mr. Parks was one of the most prolific figures behind a camera in the 20th century. His photojournalism from the 1940s through the 1970s captured aspects of American life, including issues with like the civil rights, poverty, race relations. Mr. Parks was the first African American on staff at Life magazine, and he was also responsible for some of the most beautiful imagery in the pages of Ebony, Glamour, Vogue. He later went on to co-found Essence magazine in 1969, and Mr. Parks became the first African American to write and direct a major Hollywood studio feature film, The Learning Tree, based on his best-selling semi-autobiographical novel. His next film, Shaft, helped to shape the Black's population area in the 1970s. Parks once said, "I saw that the camera could be a weapon against poverty, against racism, against all sorts of social wrongs. I knew at that point I had to have a camera." Madam C.J. Walker. Madam C.J. Walker was the first Black female millionaire in America. She made her fortune by creating a homemade line of hair care products for Black women. Born Sarah B. Breedlove, she was inspired to create her products after experiencing a scalp disorder and hair loss. It led to the creation of the Walker system of hair care. She built an empire, selling products directly to Black women, then employing others to sell them. She used her fortune to fund scholarships for women at Tuskegee Institute and donate to the NAACP, the Black YMCA, and other charities. In fact, Netflix historical drama of self-made inspired by the life of Miss Madam C.J. Walker gives insight into her story. Auntie Malone. While Madam C.J. Walker may be known as the first Black female millionaire, she didn't get there without the likes of the employer, Miss Annie Malone, who was also a millionaire. Her contributions to the hair care industry have been overshadowed by the success of Mrs. Walker's success. Malone was a chemist, an entrepreneur. She developed a hair product to straighten African American women's hair without damaging it, and eventually created a line of hair care products and beauty products. She and her assistant sold the products door to door, giving demonstrations before business took off after the World Fair in 1904. Miss Malone established Poirot College, a cosmetology school and training center in St. Louis in 1918. She had 32 branches of her school throughout the country in the mid 1950s. Alvin Ailey. Mr. Ailey was an acclaimed dancer and choreographer who earned global recognition for his impact on modern dance. After honing in his technique at the Lester Horton Dance Theater and acting as its director until the 1954 disbandment, Mr. Ailey had the desire to choreograph his own ballet and works that different from the traditional pieces at the time. This inspired him to start the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater in 1958, a multiracial troupe that provided a platform for talented Black dancers and traveled around the world. His most popular piece, Revelations, is an ode to the Southern Black Church. He died in 1989, but in 2014, he posthumously received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the country's highest civilian honor, in recognition of his contributions and commitment to civil rights and dance in America. Ella Baker. Miss Baker was a major force in shaping the development of the civil rights movement. She was a field secretary and branch director for the NAACP and also co-founded an organization that raised money to fight the Jim Crow laws. Additionally, Ms. Baker, a key organizer for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC, once in her biggest contributions to the movement was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or the SNCC, which prioritized nonviolent protests, assisted in organizing the 1961 Freedom Rides, and aided in registering Black voters. The Ella Baker Center for Human Rights continued to carry on her legacy. Mae Jemison. Miss Mae Jemison was the first African American woman who orbited into space aboard the shuttle Endeavour in 1992. The team made 127 orbits around the Earth over the course of 8 days. Miss Jemison is also a physician, teacher, a Peace Corps volunteer, and the president of a tech company. Miss Jemison's group, she continually to work towards the advancement of young women of color, getting more involved in technology, engineering, and math careers. Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Before Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Keith Richards, Elvis, Johnny Cash stunned their guitars or bangled out their melodies on the piano, Sister Rosetta Tharpe created a musical style that would take the world by storm. hailed as the godmother of rock and roll and both originator of pop gospel. She brought on emotionally charged, dimensional to the electric guitar, creating the foundation of rock and roll. She's also credited for introducing the spirituality of the gospel into the secular world of rock and roll. Little Richard called her his greatest influence, and Chuck Berry said that his entire career was just one long impersonation of Miss Rosetta Tharpe. In 1969, she was nominated for a Grammy for Best Gospel Performance for her album Precious Memories. Max Robinson. Mr. Robinson became the first Black person to anchor the nightly network news in 1968. Robinson got his start in 1959 when he was hired to read the news at a station in Portsmouth, Virginia. The station owner hired him as a news reader, but was told he couldn't show his face. When Robinson protested, he was fired. He moved to Washington to work as a reporter and later co-anchored the evening news, making him the first Black anchor in a major U.S. city. ABC News took notice and named him one of the 3 co-anchors on the World News Tonight. He was also one of the 44 founders of the National Association of Black Journalism, or the NABJ. Dr. Patricia Bath. Dr. Patricia Bath, an ophthalmologist and laser scientist, was not only the first female African-American doctor to patent a medical device, but also the first person to invent a surgery that greatly advanced treatment for cataracts. Dr. Bath invented the laser phaco probe in 1981, which used lasers to treat cataracts more precisely and less painful. The invention was able to recover vision for people who had been blind or vision impaired for decades. Ethel Payne. Miss Ethel L. Payne is known as the first lady of Black press. She combined activism with journalism during the 1950s and 60s. Some of the iconic figures of history Miss Payne interviewed include Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, President John F. Kennedy, Nelson Mandela, among several other noteworthy figures. In 1972, CBS hired Miss Payne as a radio and television commentator, and she became the first Black woman to hold such a position. Miss Payne is also the only African-American out of 4 female journalists honored by the U.S. Postal Service on a Woman in Journalism stamp. Fritz Pollard. Mr. Pollard was the first African-American head coach in the National Football League, or the NFL. He was 5 feet 9 inches and 165 pounds, what most would consider small for that sport. He attended Brown University and was the school's first Black player. After serving in World War I, he joined the anchored pros of American Professional Football Association, which later became the NFL. He was one of only 2 Black players in the league, and in 1921, while still playing, the team named him its coach. Over the course of his career, he coached 4 different teams, founded the Chicago football team of all African-American players. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2005. Maya Angelou, a prolific writer and poet and activist, is known for her lyrical prose and regal speaking voice. Miss Angelou is the first Black woman to appear on a quarter. She rose to international prominence after the publication of her groundbreaking autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. With its account of rape and racism in segregated South, the recipient of more than 30 honorary degrees, she read on the pulse of mourning at the 1993 inauguration of former President Bill Clinton. Miss Angelou reading was the first time an African American woman wrote and presented a poem at a president inauguration. And we also send our sentiments and love as her son has passed on. We just notified on today. So our sentiments to Dr. Maya Angelou's family and her sons. Henrietta Lacks, after being diagnosed with cervical cancer at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in 1951, a sample of Lacks cancer cells was taken without her consent by a researcher. She died later that year at 31 years of age. Her cells would go on a researcher. She died later. Her cells would go on to advance medical research for years to come, as they had the unique ability to double every 20 to 24 hours. They have been used to test the effects of radiation and poisons to study the human genome, to learn more about how viruses work, and played a critical role in the development of polio vaccines at the Johns Hopkins hospitals. Wally Amos, excuse me, as you stroll the cookie aisles in the grocery store, the familiar yellow box filled with chocolate chip cookies that says Famous Amos Cookies was created by Mr. Amos. He first began selling cookies in 1975 after receiving some startup money from several close friends, including the late singer Marvin Gaye, to open the store on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. By the early 1980s, demand was rising, so Mr. Amos decided to mass produce the cookies. He also created Uncle Wally's muffins and Cookie Kwanzaa. Ida B. Wells. Miss Wells was an African American journalist, abolitionist, feminist who led an anti-lynching crusade in the United States in the 1890s. She owned the newspaper, the Memphis Free Speech, Headlight, and was a vocal critic of the segregated schools. Later, she became active in the anti-lynching campaign in 1892, after multiple friends were lynched, according to the National Park Service. Even visiting the White House to advocate for reforms in 1896, she formed the National Association of Colored Women, and Miss Wells is also considered a founding member of the National Association for the Achievement of Colored People, or the NAACP. Most recently, Miss Wells was immortalized with a Barbie doll modeled after her. Jesse Owens. Mr. Owens was a track and field athlete who set a world record in the long jump in 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin, and went on to unravel for 25 years. And went on, he was the first American to win 4 gold medals at the Olympics that year. He won medals in 100 and 200 meter dashes, along with 100-meter relay and other events off the track. In 1996, Mr. Owens received the Presidential Medal of Freedom and was posthumously awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 1990. Bessie Coleman. Miss Coleman is the first licensed Black pilot in the world. Through history, though history has favored Amelia Earhart or the Wright brothers, Miss Coleman went to flight school in France in 1919 and received her pilot license in 1921, inspiring diversity in the aviation field. In 1922, she performed the first public flight by a Black woman. She was famous for doing loops and making the figure eights in an airplane. In 1995, the Bessie Coleman stamp was created in her honor. Rebecca L. Crumpler was the first Black female doctor in the United States after attending the prestigious Massachusetts private school, West Newton English and Classical School. And she worked as a nurse for 8 years until applying to medical school in 1860 at the New England Female Medical College, or PBS. Reported that she worked as a physician for the Freemen's Bureau for the state of Virginia. She later practiced in Boston, predominantly Black neighborhood at the time, Beacon Hill, and published a book of medical discourses in 2 parts. Marsha P. Johnson is celebrated, a veteran of the 1969 Stonewall Inn protest in New York, is an influential transgender activist, a force to be reckoned with in the gay liberation movement. Johnson, a Black trans woman and activist at the forefront of the LGBTQ movement, in addition to being the co-founder of STAR, an organization that housed homeless queer youth. Johnson also fought for equality through the Gay Liberation Front. There's a Netflix documentary that brought Johnson's story to life with the documentary, The Death and the Life of Marsha P. Johnson. So thank you all. I hope that this enlightened some of the notoriety of famous Black Americans that helped build America, as we celebrate them with honor and dignity and give recognition to each and every accomplishment that we all make, regardless to our skin color or our ethnic background. So I pray that you all have a great Black History Celebration Month, and honor those in your community and honor those that have contributed to a better life, whether it be your parents, your siblings, your teachers, your neighbors. Everybody plays a part in making a great community, city, state, and nation. So happy Black History Month, and we love you here at A.B.B.A. Until the next time, I pray that you all have a great and safe experience this month. God bless.